You have no choice. You have to choose. Foo Fighters. Something from Nothing. The Daily Grind, Chapter 184. The way the lair was laid out was, originally, with just one floor, mostly three separate parts. The front, which was supposed to be a lobby or a check-in area, the kitchen and dining zone, which had sort of been unchanged, and the back, which was a pool hall? James couldn't remember. Maybe he'd never known. The addition of a few dozen green orbs and whatever weird chain of effects Momo and Reed had used to link an elevator from here to Los Angeles had altered the space slightly, but not fundamentally changed the floor plan. There was a restaurant next door, renting out a chunk of the same building. When the building had been on the market, Anesh had just grabbed the whole thing for them, and that restaurant was where Nate had moved his kitchen to, pushing out the size of the dining area and making the weird buffer zone where the not underground bathrooms were even stranger as far as positioning went. But the front, cleared of everything else, had been kept the same as it was, transmuted to a lounge and communal area. The back, which was very obviously just a big box of a warehouse space, had also kept its shape, but they had done a little more work on it to make it comfortable. This was where dungeon teams planned out their operations, where maps were assembled and studied as groups, where new life forms were discussed and strategized for. Small pods of desks and tables dotted the space, with generous walkways between them and standing whiteboards surrounding them like walls. Each one a peek into a different little world, or a different little crisis. Along the back wall, they had set up a small stage, a projector and screen, and an assemblage of seating for both humans and Camercondas, where anyone who needed to address a group could do so. James had, weirdly, only really recently learned the value of a good PowerPoint presentation once he was out of the world of having an office job and into the world of dungeon nonsense. People learned in different ways, and for some people, having a written reminder of the list of ways a rat roach could kill you was easier to follow than having someone say it out loud. Normally, this space was pretty quiet. If there were people here, it was because there was a delve coming up, or there was a scheduled planning meeting, or the rotating check-in with Officium Mundi groups updating the growing map. James had actually stuck an old couch that he'd salvaged in here a while back to use as a place to read when he wanted to relax out of sight in the quiet. Normally, though, was the key word there. Normally the space was quiet. Today the space was crowded, was the kind way to say it. It wasn't jam-packed or overly chaotic, but it sure did seem like everyone who had been available, and many people who hadn't, had all shown up here on a pretty damn short notice. I was in the bath for like 30 minutes, maximum, James griped to himself as he looked out over the room. How did everyone even... internet, I guess, but damn. The pods of desks and tables had been shifted around, clearing a wider semicircle around the stage. Every chair, bench, and beanbag in the building had been dragged over to fill that space, and more still brought in from other places. There were still paths to walk through, and it looked like someone was guiding the organizing of it all, so that was good at least. But there were easily 100 people in here of various shapes and sizes, and the atmosphere was quite charged. They had never really done something like this before. Not really. The Order had grown a lot since James had shoehorned it into existence. From sporadic hiring of specialists and new delvers to recruiting dungeon survivors. From turning FBI agents to growing the response program. From making new life to liberating creations from the dungeons. They sat now at over 200 active members, and with the incoming resources they were planning on bringing in, James had hopes to scale that up immensely in the coming years. But boy was it a shock to see 100 people crammed into a crowded converted warehouse space. It was also interesting how people divided up. Individual response teams were easy to spot. They sat in their teams in small clusters, humans, cameracondas, sometimes manifested authorities, bantering with each other in a way that James found intimately familiar. But response wasn't one unified block. All those teams were divided up among everyone else. High schoolers, the interns who the Order was trying to give the best tools to be good people to that they could, mostly sat in pairs, blending in with everyone else. Everyone else, the pattern was lost on James, if there was one. It was just a jumbled mess of researchers, record keepers, engineers, gardeners, builders, wizards, accountants, detectives, spies, and whatever else the Order needed done at any given time, personified as an emergent role and a new job title. There was sound in the air, a dozen conversations and debates and arguments, laughter mixed in with attention. The loudest, quiet hum of voices that James had ever heard, like the dining area during peak hours, only more, occasionally punctuated by a squeal from one of the 4 actual young children running around the place, the kids playing their own game while the adults did serious business. Well, the human children, anyway. It kind of warmed his heart to see there wasn't a species division. With the exception of a group of cameracondas that were very new, who were mostly kept together like this was a field trip, watched over by their caretakers. The caretakers were a mixed species themselves, and suddenly James made the realization that they might be doing the cameraconda population a disservice, further eroding their own culture by trying to help. He'd need to talk to somebody about that later. Watcher under Stone, maybe. Or that first cameraconda leader that he had talked to, who he was pretty sure still hadn't picked a name. It also occurred to him that the potion people who had chosen to attend, he didn't actually ask them if they had a species name yet, he should get on that, were also sitting separated from everyone else, just off to the side of the stage, not in the spotlight, but certainly not mixed in with anyone. Before he could fully complete his assessment of the room, James was approached directly by a determined-looking woman in a light mask who seemed to be patrolling around the doors. "My, you're a tall one, aren't you?" she said bluntly, looking James up and down. He didn't think he was particularly tall, but the late-40s bony woman that only came up to his shoulders certainly might have disagreed. "Let's find you a seat, huh?" "Oh, thank you, but I'm good," James said. "Well, let's get you not blocking the door, then." The woman was smiling behind the mask, but somehow James just got a sense of exasperation, bordering on irritation, from her. "Oh," he cleared his throat. "Sorry, I was surveying my domain." James slid himself to the side, already preparing to explain himself and give an actual apology, when a small boxy shape dragged itself down one of the aisles, between a pair of humans having a conversation, and toward James at the door. One of the Shalaxes, obviously one of the tame ones, since they were nowhere near the dungeon, but this one had a passenger on it. "Oh, hey, Rufus." James brightened up. "How's it going?" The ambulatory computer dragged its case over next to the woman, on command, Rufus giving her a friendly pat on the leg with one of his own pen legs, before turning to James as his mount coiled its cables underneath itself and settled in. "Assorted jelly beans," read the strip of masking tape written on its side. Rufus peered up at James, and then pitched himself backward, crossing his front legs with a cock of his elongated stapler head. "Oh, oh no, I'm in trouble for something?" James guessed, and Rufus gave him a nod. "Okay. Am I in the way?" He glanced back at the woman. "Sorry, hi, I'm James. Nice to meet you. Am I still in the way?" "Marianne," she replied, offering a hand to shake, which James took, surprising him with a painfully tight squeeze. "You're not in the way any more," she said, "but I have more people-placing to do. Don't loiter." She waggled a finger at him as she turned and headed over to where a cameraconda was sitting in the door with a similar look on its face to what James had when he had first seen the Order's full crowd. "My, you're a colorful one," her voice came back to him. "Let's find you a seat." James let her words trail off, as Marianne launched back into her duties as usher. "That's Bill's wife, right?" he asked, turning back to Rufus. The Strider just narrowed his eye at James, shifting his legs to make it clear he was still cross with his friend. Right. Have we not hung out enough lately? Because I have an excuse for... No, that's not it? James raised his eyebrows at the stapler's denial. Am I just late? Is that it? Rufus nodded, glad that James was finally getting it. Okay, but it's been half an hour, man. How did... Actually, never mind. I'm sorry I'm late. Where should I be? Rufus jabbed a leg into the air, and then tapped his Shalaxi palanquin and braced himself as the ambulatory computer stood up on coiled power tentacles and rotated to take them down an aisle toward the stage. Rufus mounted on top, leg waving James to follow. It was hard to argue with that, really, so follow James did. Through a crowd of people he mostly recognized, some of whom elbowed or nosed each other and pointed in his direction as he passed. It made him anxious, honestly. He was kind of thrilled that the cluster of researchers up near the front weren't even remotely focused on him as he made it to the stage. Instead, they were locked in a heated debate about what qualified as lunch for the purposes of the lunchbox of holding lunch. James listened in as best he could as he passed, and remembered Alex's theory from earlier in the day. Was it really only a couple of hours ago? That Dungeon Tech from the office was actually just Blue Orb life, because nothing that wasn't alive and kind of sarcastic could have such a specific categorization of what lunch was as that stupid box. That stupid, amazing, perfect lunchbox. Literally every example he overheard was appended with the phrase, "But it depends." "You're late," Reed greeted him as he passed, turning away from his subordinates in their inane food-based conversation. "I was in the bath," James said, by way of explanation. "And also, I didn't set a time for this at all, so I can't possibly be late." "Oh, you're not in charge of this meeting," Reed told him, stepping over a cameraconda and falling in next to James as they trailed behind Rufus the last couple of rows of chairs up to the stage. James sighed. "This is what I get for giving up authority," he bemoaned. "Who is it? Karen?" "No, Planner," Reed said. "Turns out Infomorphs can be in charge of things." James thought that through quickly. "I had not really considered that. That's on me. Okay, neat." He planted a hand on the edge of the raised platform and hopped up, ignoring Reed's much more sensible path around to the short set of steps on the side. "I'm still not late, though," he added. "Also, hey." James greeted the people who were already on the stage. Momo was one of them, a guy from Response that James was almost certain was named Marcus, texture of bark dust, and 3 empty seats arrayed behind long tables that faced the audience. Reed slid into one of the chairs, tapping at the tablet screen that was waiting for him on the table, leaving James standing awkwardly in the middle of the space. "Waiting," Texture of bark dust informed James. "You are, surprisingly, not last." "I called this meeting," James protested again. "Also, who's left?" "Well, Dave and JP just landed upstairs," Reed said, reading off the message from the Order's shared server. "Good landing. I didn't even notice the building shake. But no, we're waiting on Nate." "I'm here," Nate said, having appeared from seemingly nowhere, but not looking winded in the slightest. The heavy-set chef and/or spy taking his own chair and cracking open the laptop he had waiting for himself. "Sit down, let's go." "Okay." James glanced over at the roof access, expecting JP and Dave to slide in at any time, but they were smart, they could catch up. Assuming they could find somewhere to sit, that was. James glanced out over the crowd of 100 or so people, shifting his posture a little, straightening up, suddenly having a presence on the stage. Some of the people in the front quieted down. Research ended their lunch-based debate. The parents or caretakers regained control of the kids who were treating the crowd like a playground, either getting them seated or ushering them out of the room. Someone handed James a microphone, and he flicked his wrist to give himself enough cord to pace and talk at the same time. And everything went quiet for him. "All right," James said. "Here's how we're going to do this." He started pacing lightly, getting into the flow of talking to an audience. "I'm going to give an overview of the situation. Then, Nate's got some supplemental information from our new guests. After that, we're going to discuss what to do." He looked at the crowd, meeting the eyes of everyone looking back. We've really reached the point where these kinds of decisions affect all of you in some way, so your input matters. Someone probably already told you this, but those of us on the stage are going to be trying to actively keep up on your input as it comes in. There are specific channels in the discussion server for each representative on the stage. If you have questions that aren't being answered, thoughts you think matter, concerns, even just your own take on things, put it there. If you don't have a device for that, we'll do a spoken Q&A twice during the discussion. James took a deep breath. We're fumbling through remaking democracy here, he said. Right now, the people on stage are functionally acting as unelected representatives, but just because you didn't vote for us doesn't mean we aren't here to listen to you and take your advice, especially on expert knowledge that you may just flat out know more than us on. The point is to reach consensus about what we should do and outline how to do it before we start assigning people to make it happen and cut loose. We won't do something like this for every single issue, but we're going to try for the important ones, and boy is this an important one. He paused to let everyone digest that. The crowd quiet now, but for a few rustles of shifting in seats or the low drone of the fans someone smarter than him had brought into the room. All right, with that said, James continued, let me tell you how my day's been going. What followed was the quickest summary James could give of the events of the last few hours. Linking up with JP and Dave, making diplomatic contact with the potion people, then the conversation about their origin and escape. It didn't take James any kind of magic to see how clearly uncomfortable the surviving potion people were, sitting off to the side of the stage, to have their natures spelled out so clearly to so many people, but he pressed on anyway. He quickly talked about how the alchemists had intended them to be used, then how they had experimented on people who were obviously unwilling test subjects, about who they all were, including the fact that one of them was an ex-alchemist himself, and then his decision to offer them help. I got a couple questions about that, Reed said from behind James. Yeah, go ahead. James stepped aside, letting Reed talk. Reed didn't have a happy expression on his face as he relayed the main question to James. Is it a good idea to bring in unverified, non-human life without some kind of way of ensuring trust? Also, I have a similar question here about making that unilateral decision. I'm going to assume those are rhetorical and in good faith. James's voice was a little colder than he meant it to be as he turned back to the audience. The decision to help, and essentially offer refugee status, was mine. Everyone in the Order has the internal authority and responsibility to help where we can. Sometimes we're going to run into the use of resource issues that limit how much we can help, but never question that we should do it. Also, quick reminder, roughly 30% of everyone in this room isn't human, so whatever. He sighed, and then grinned and shrugged. So far, trusting people who need help and getting them that help has only made us stronger, and a closer-knit community, so yeah, I stand by that. Any other questions? Karen has preemptively asked about the resource use part, texture of Barkdust's voice amplified from her speakers without the need for a microphone. But you have covered that. Somewhat. Look, 6 people don't need more resources than we generate. James rolled his eyes. Anyway, moving on. Moving on to the hard part of the briefing, that was, which was summarizing, without being overwhelmed by anger or panic, the attack on the house. Unprovoked assault, tactical in nature, not as much of an alpha strike as it could have been, though they were clearly planning to capture more than kill at first, or at least James suspected. He relayed his fight with the first Nobel, and the deaths of the 2 potion people who hadn't been able to get past. Trading off his position on stage twice, once to JP, who explained the alchemists' use of their people disguised as police, and once to Frequency of Sunlight, who covered the fight at the back of the house while James was clearing people out the front. The audience had mixed reactions. Some, mostly response members, looked appraising. Others reacted with disgust and anger, which James was trying to keep out of his own voice as he explained the events. He caught a lot of looks over to where the potion people were sitting, but if there was any distrust there before, it was replaced now by pity and active concern. I got a thought from response. Marcus spoke into one of the pauses that James left in his briefing. Are the replacement potions not self-replicating? No, James said. We originally thought they might be, but it's confirmed that's not the case. It's just a really weird corner case, the kind that shows up a lot with dungeon tech. So no existential threat to humanity? I mean, okay, quick show of hands, or tails. Who wants to come here tomorrow and talk about the philosophy of species? James called out to the crowd. Like, is it bad if humanity is replaced by a different species? This used to mostly be a question about AI, but it's kind of relevant to other things now. More people than he was expecting raised their relevant appendages. Alright, this is a conversation for tomorrow, us. Right now, the answer is going to be a simple no, he told Marcus. Works for me, the dispatcher nodded. Though I think it was meant as a hostile replacement, like a non-consensual replacement. Oh, yeah, no. James shook his head. Anyway, that brings us up to the moment where I flipped off everyone in the building and teleported out, and now Nate has some follow-up information on the Nobels? Yep, Nate nodded, rising from his chair with a tired grunt. He'd been on his feet all day, which was basically every day for him, but that didn't mean he had to pretend to be energetic all the time. Alright, listen up. Nobels, like the chemist, yes, James, mundane first, then mystical. He gave a quick rundown. The alchemist's foot soldiers were outlined in quick, efficient detail. Nate was way better than James at staying on track and not diverting. They were soldiers, hired, not kidnapped, but modified to have an advantage in a fight that should be overwhelming. The alchemists didn't have too many at once because of resource reasons, either in terms of potions or just hard cash sometimes. It's the potions that are the big thing, though, obviously. They all have Latin names. I don't care what they are. Ask Columbia later if you're curious. Nate crossed his arms. One for walking through walls and bullets. One for psychically linking to a squad. One for durability and ruthlessness. One for blowing up your own body parts. That last one is the one that burned the house down, in case anyone's confused. Dibs on naming that one. Momo dove into the conversation. Sure? Nate raised an eyebrow, wrinkling his bald forehead. Hand grenade. Kid, that's a thing already. You can't make this confusing for people. Nate flatly replied before he turned back to the audience, specifically to the people taking notes. The alchemists have a short list of potions they actually sell. They'll be on the server and copied to the ops manual, along with an incomplete list of experiments and non-sellers that Columbia remembers. As for actual combat capacity and threat assessment, I got this for you. In a straight-up fight, we'll win. The fact that a single Camerconda stops their big defense while they don't have a good way around ours means we can take them. But they'll probably take some of us with them. They are soldiers, or at least defense contractors. Mercenaries. They aren't bad at their jobs, either. The one James fought adapted really quick to the shield bracer. They easily could have gone the other way. So I recommend not getting into a fair fight. Nate ended there and sat back down, ceding the stage back to James. You have never once recommended to me that we get in a fair fight, James told the man. Yeah, because I'm not a fucking idiot, Nate answered, perhaps unaware that his mic was still hot. So, James said, not really succeeding at suppressing a grin and hearing a number of chuckles from the crowd. That's our tactical landscape anyway. Now we need to decide what we're going to do about it. Long-term decisions about how to approach the existence of a changeling-style life form can come later. Short-term defense of our people and homes until we know the situation is settled is already kicked off. What we're talking about today is, what exactly do we do about the Guild of Alchemists? He paused and then gave a shrugging tilt of his head to the audience, stepping back to the seat at one of the tables that was left open for him and settled in, clicking his microphone into the stand as he did so. Let's hear some options, James said. First thing, Nate cut in, setting down his phone. Any tactical military opinion from the crowd, send it through me. I'm going to cut out the ones that won't work. If anyone wants to know why I ignored you, I'll explain later. Then he angled a flattened palm over toward Texture of Bark Dust. Sorry, cut you off there. Go. What do we want to do? She asked, digital voice echoing. Do we actually want to destroy them? We could. It wouldn't be hard for us, but do we want to? There were some uncomfortable noises from the room, including from James, who sighed as he answered. I don't think anyone wants to start another fight, no, he said. At least we shouldn't. Look, the whole point of the Order is to generate more good, right? Dungeon delving isn't really about the combat, though there is that constant danger. It's about exploration and discovery. Fighting in our world has always been self-defense, in some way. This would be different. Preemptive self-defense puts us in difficult territory, Marcus said calmly. We'd basically be declaring that we're the people who should use violence to end things we don't like, which... no? Admitting that that was true hurt, but he felt like he needed to anyway. We do that, James said. No, we react, Nate said. That's different. Even status quo is us reacting to constant physical threats on the lives of people under our protection. We don't target people for being shitty. If we did that, we'd never run out of targets. Actually, yeah, can I ask a question? Momo raised her hand. Nate looked around before realizing she was more or less asking him. Yeah, that's why we're here, he said slowly. Okay, so why are the alchemists more our responsibility than, like, Nestle? She asked. I mean, they're wizards, and we're wizards, so maybe we're uniquely suited to deal with them, and I do think we should do something about them. They're kind of obviously a threat to someone, and the fact that they were brewing something to sell to the CIA to replace people is kind of fucked. I don't think they should have power, but why them and not, like, a corporation that uses child slave labor? They're small enough for us to deal with, and their limited arcane resources means their power base is easy to remove, James answered coldly. Also magic. Yeah. Reed, do you want to talk about the field effect? The head researcher startled in his chair, slamming his elbow into the table edge as he was called on. Once he was done hissing through his teeth in pain, he cleared his throat and spoke up. Yeah, so the field effect that James is talking about is the tendency for people to lose focus on paranormal effects or events. It seems to scale up the larger an organization the individual is a member of, like some kind of bureaucracy shield. But we haven't done extensive testing yet. It's part of why our anti-cancer lottery hasn't gotten a lot of attention. We're going through hospitals, and for some reason, probably 70%, maybe, of the people that we deal with just don't internalize it. Sometimes they understand what's happened, the magic definitely works on them, but they don't change in a meaningful way to adapt to it. Which, yeah, does actually make the Order suited to these kind of problems, because we don't seem to get hit with this. I didn't know that, and that shoots down about 5 ideas, Marcus said, tapping at his tablet with a stylus. So we can't just call the FDA on these guys? James looked over at the response member with raised eyebrows. The alchemists have guns? He offered. Texture of bark dust bobbed her head from side to side. Institutionalized power does not use physical violence to intimidate. It is the implied threat of the greater collective. The threat that you could kill one inspector, you could kill the whole office, but you cannot kill the nation. Okay, so the FDA is on the table then, Marcus said, cheerfully ignoring how absolutely dire the cameraconda had sounded there. Other options? Local police, FBI, public pressure through whistleblowers, news outlets? Aren't the FBI trying to shut us down? Momo asked with a snarl of confusion written on her face. Yes, Nate said, but they're busy with other things, and haven't caused extra problems beyond... He gestured to Marcus. You know. We're getting off track, James said. We still haven't answered the core question. Do we, from our position of power, take action? Quick thing I want to clarify. Momo rolled her hand on the table, cracking her knuckles as she got their attention. We're talking about doing this to secure the safety of the potion people, right? The Pot peeps? Please don't say that word again, James snorted. Momo nodded. Right, and because we don't want them making more, now that they know that the potion does what they thought it did. Correct. Because we misjudged a thing that almost killed you, spent months spying on the alchemists, then tried to spring a trap on them by telling them the potion did a thing that they didn't think it did, but that they meant for it to do originally. Then we waited while all the potion people came together, including one who was an alchemist, thus leading the alchemists right to them, putting all of them in danger, which is bad because they're not trying to replace humanity, don't want more potions made, and are innocents that we fucked up the lives of by blowing their cover, and now we need to stop the alchemists from making potions that they want to sell to governments so they can make sleeper agents by killing people in sensitive positions in rival governments or organizations. There was a moment of quiet, and Momo taking a deep breath to replace what she had just used. Jesus, my head hurts, Marcus uttered. Texture of Bark Dust moved her mouth silently, the Camerconda slowly parsing the words Momo said, brass fangs flashing. That is... yes? Yes, that is all technically correct, James said with a sigh. Okay, I vote yes, Momo said quickly. This sounds like a problem we created, which means it's a problem we should solve. She nodded twice to herself before adding, which means my department votes yes. She seemed incredibly excited about the prospect. Reed glanced at her with narrowed eyes. Your department is 3 people. Anyway, research already voted. We're in. Response agrees too, Marcus added. Though you can sort of safely treat us as being part of a command structure, you don't need our vote to have our support. He glanced into the audience. At least, that's what Harvey told me to say. I don't know if that's correct. That's not how we work. Nate shook his head. Texture, what about your people? The Camerconda hissed in small bursts like a laugh. Which ones? She asked. The other Camercondas? Nate asked. No, wait, I just realized you're sitting in for Karen. Wait, where the hell is Karen? Shouldn't we have somebody here to tell us we're over budget? That's kind of a reductionist but completely fair look at what Karen does every day, James said, and got a few isolated laughs from people in the room that had encountered Karen at various points. Texture of Barkdust is here for recovery. Karen is off doing a family thing. We do not think we should fight, the Camerconda said simply. But other action is possible. Okay. James looked out at the assembled crowd. Does anyone have a strong reason that we should do nothing? He asked them. A few people slipped out of seats and moved to form a central line in front of the stage, while several others began typing on digital devices to send up their own questions or comments. It actually didn't take long to get through most of them, because there was some pretty big overlap in a lot of the concerns. It was too risky. It was too public. No one actually wanted to make an enemy that would hold a grudge. While they took a quick break to process concerns, small conversations popped up around the room, and James, listening in almost without meaning to, started to get a shape of the order as represented by the people here. Yeah, it was risky. But Response did a risky job every day, and they were almost certainly making enemies doing it. Yeah, it was public, but, well, same answer. James started to realize, as he heard people talk to each other, just how much the Order had become defined by the Response program. On one hand, that was neat. They were the helping hand, reaching out, but stopping immediate threats and helping with emergency medical transport was a band-aid, not a solution. He needed to talk to Karen, get a picture of how long until the mass material duplication procedures could make the Order irrationally wealthy enough to start pointing recovery at strategic problems the same way they pointed Response at tactical ones. In the end, they took a simple vote. Not everybody was here, but this was a representative sample of the Order, and they'd work out a better system later. The fact that they had this option during what could otherwise have been a pressing emergency was kind of a great perk of the telepads to begin with. do something won, to no surprise, but no one, James included, felt like they should get into a shooting war. Discussion resumed, with a tension that had been bled out of the room that James hadn't really noticed forming. Or maybe it was just him. Okay, so does the FDA thing not work? There's no way the potions are legal for sale, Marcus brought up again. It's more that, okay, look, these guys have $1 billion in personal wealth, and probably more tied up in the guild's assets. They're also only a dozen or so people. They're not a corporation with a major bottling factory. Nate shrugged. They can, and probably will, bribe their way out of legal trouble, either by just paying off investigators or hiring a legal team that will drag it out so long they'll all be dead by the time it's done. Hey, I have a somewhat grim suggestion, Momo said, looking like she was apprehensive about bringing it up at all. James looked over at her, seeing some pretty unpleasant worry in her eyes. I mean, you don't need to if you don't think it'll work. Well, it probably would work. That's the thing. Momo winced. Why not just wipe their memories? We've done it before, with people who are, awful. Why not here? They don't have any innate magic, right? They're just dudes with a magic cauldron. Momo looked unhappy for even having suggested it. Many of the assembled Order members who had survived exactly that kind of anti-mimetic effect didn't look happy with her either. It's better than killing them, right? Sap, Nate corrected. But yeah, she's right. 2 problems, Texture Barkdust said matter-of-factly in an electronic tone that somehow came across like a disappointed teacher. 1. Planner is not equipped for or willing to take action in a hostile fashion. 2. It is wrong. Wrong is kind of flexible sometimes, Nate pointed out. No, Texture Barkdust replied with the same voice, like she was lecturing. You complicate this. You should not. Right is flexible. Wrong is not. It is easy to see from where I am. I'm actually on her side here. Sorry, Nate, Reed spoke up. Look, we're a bunch of nerds in the basement, right? We talk about sci-fi concepts that should be out of reach but suddenly aren't, basically every day. Wiping someone's memory is assault. These guys have been doing the alchemy thing for decades. You take that out, you're basically killing whoever they were. If we're prepared to do that, we may as well just shoot them. Because if they're not willing to give up that knowledge, any infomorphs doing the procedure are going to basically shred their personality anyway. Alright, so it won't work. Cool. Momo slapped the table. Moving on. Why not just... Actually, hang on. Back to the infomorph thing. An entire room of people glared at her. I'm sorry, she threw up her hands. But why not incept them with an infomorph that guides them to be better people? Or just locks them out of selling to governments or something? James made a low, uncomfortable groan. That's still bad? Have you ever had a nascent assignment in your head? Being unable to do or talk about a specific thing when you know it's there is kind of a massive violation. We're still talking about using force to change someone's personality. Momo rolled her whole head around with her eyes. I was more thinking as a form of corrective confinement. Keep them from hurting anybody while they work to be less garbage people. What if we don't use force? Marcus asked. Sorry, I'm new to this whole thing. Maybe this is a stupid question, but what if we just ask them to stop? Everyone looked at him. Even Reed looked up from the constant input of his screen. The young man withered under the attention, somehow less comfortable to be talking to other members of the Order than he was answering emergency calls. I just mean, isn't that what you do? I've heard stories. Or rumors anyway, I guess, Marcus asked James. In fairness, Momo said, patting James on the shoulder, you do keep using the power of friendship to solve problems. Her words got a small laugh from a lot of the people seated around the stage. Yes, hello, Texture of Barkdust added pointedly, getting the laugh to echo again, louder this time. James would have had an answer, but he was too busy being bright red from embarrassment and trying to hide his head in his arms. Probably not the most professional attitude for a leader to take, but he reminded himself he had abdicated leadership. Wait, he was still on a stage, guiding a discussion about group action. How had this happened? He had told them directly and everything. If we're making contact, there's a few options on the table, actually, Nate said, giving James a reprieve. Just asking them to drop the matter might work. Kinda for the same reason Barkdust brought up earlier. We are an implicit threat. But it could be that neither of our groups want to fight, so we find another solution. If we want to be the ones coming out on top, then yeah, we can try to absorb them into the order somehow. Probably by buying them out. $1 billion, Texture of Barkdust said dryly. See, this is why I should have known you were Karen's replacement, Nate grumbled. The problem with the magic of friendship is we don't actually have a lot to offer them. The Order is an amazing deal for anyone facing poverty, mimetic erasure, or other dungeon fuckery, but it's not going to sway a bunch of old white guys who are used to eating caviar and drinking thousand-year-old scotch while they pretend to play golf. That cannot be accurate, Texture of Barkdust mused. He's exaggerating, but not by much, Reed said. My grandpa was like that, especially the pretending to play golf thing. And yeah, it's pretty hard to get through to people who are already rich, 'cause from their perspective they won, you know? They don't want to fight the system, 'cause the system is the game they're good at. The best we can probably get here is offering them a lot of money for their magic tree, but they're just going to say no because they can make more money keeping the tree. Can we steal the tree? James asked, reminding all of you that we can teleport. Oh, good Christ, Nate rubbed his forehead. This is the nuke thing all over again. You told me not to tell anyone about that, and now here you are speaking into a microphone that I know you know is on, James chastised the Order's chef. But yeah, what if we just take the tree? Then they have a time-sensitive vested interest in hunting us down and retrieving their asset, and since they can't teleport, it's probably going to end up with us remodeling this building to patch up bullet holes again, Nate replied. So no, don't do that, because they still have at least a dozen highly trained, heavily armed, chemically enhanced murderers on their side, and they know we exist. Okay, so we're looking at, what, just asking them to stop? Reed paused. That can't be our best option, can it? They killed people. His voice wavered, got quiet, even though it was still broadcast out to the room. You can't just kill people and not have some kind of punishment, right? We could at least demand they give up the tree, or drain their bank accounts, demilitarize them, or... Yeah, Nate, I know it's the wrong word, just something, right? Right? A rumbling of discontent passed through the room, mostly from the newer human members who had joined the Order recently. James shook his head sadly at Reed as he answered. It's not about punishment, he said. I know, don't get me wrong, I get it. I'm mad. They tried to blow me up at least twice today, and striking back would probably feel really good, right up until we started counting our losses. But it doesn't actually matter how it feels. What matters is getting results. We were literally talking about this a couple weeks ago. Punishment doesn't stop crime, right? And we actually want the alchemists to stop what they're doing, not just stop while we're watching or until they can hide it better. It doesn't help they're the boring kind of evil, Marcus added. They aren't crazy cultists or secret Nazis or... Wait, are they secret Nazis? Probably, Nate shrugged, the words slipping dryly from him without thinking. Marcus stared at the barrel-chested chef and tactician for a couple of seconds before deciding that Nate was probably joking and whipping his head back to face the crowd. But yeah, they're mostly just rich jerks who want more money. They are the least interesting James Bond villains, except they're barely even a threat to anybody. I don't think we should ignore they did kill a bunch of people. Reed's right, James added, with more calm than he felt. But we can't really pretend it would be justified to retaliate now. Momo raised a hand, and James glanced over at her before ceding talking priority. Hey, someone just sent me a question to ask. If they're a bunch of old money jerks, why were they suddenly trying to make a super stealthy spy substance? To sell? Texture of Barkdust asked. I am still new to your world, but that is how economy works, yes? You produce goods or services, or siphon wealth from those that do. They chose to produce goods. Right. But what I'm saying is, they were already making potions and selling them for a ton of money, Momo said. And probably also the siphoning thing? Nate nodded and interrupted. They have investments, yeah. Unfaltering, Momo plowed through the thought that someone had brought to her attention. So, why suddenly work to make something like that? Because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Nate, they were never going to last long once they started selling it, right? Uh. Nate paused and ran a hand over his bald head. Well, shit, yeah. You can't just let the manufacturer of something like that keep operating. It's not just a weapon, it's a whole new battlefield. Whoever got to them first probably could have just fed them their own potion, replaced them, and kept it for themselves. Probably CIA from what their plans were. Which is fucking obvious now that you say it. I should have seen that. Okay, Momo continued. So why were they making this, and not their tried and true cash cows? There was a beat of silence before James awkwardly suggested, Ghosts? What? How would that... I don't know, he threw his hands up. I'm using humor to keep from just swearing a lot at how this stupid rabbit hole of problems keeps getting deeper. James stood up from his seat again and started pacing to the front of the stage. Okay, we're not going to hammer out any more details here today, but now you're all on the same page as us. If anyone has further thoughts, there will be a monitored discussion space for it. He looked around at the crowd, nodding proudly without really thinking about it. I like this method, James said. We'll refine this. As for the alchemists, assignments. Nate, Momo, get me more information on the motive behind the potions. Got it. Yes, sir, Momo saluted like she was in some kind of navy. James rolled his eyes and turned back. Texture of Barkdust, please get a recovery agent set up with the survivors. Make sure they get what they need. And for you... He turned to face the 3 potion people who had stayed by the stage, listening intently the whole time. We'll talk after you're settled in about the future. This is as close as we'll get to a formal introduction to the Order. Welcome. Wish it could have been under better circumstances. He sighed as the potions silently inclined their heads back at him in unison. Okay, so we're going with diplomacy as our option. Response and recovery, please pick someone suitable to be our emissary, and response, arrange for a security team for it when this goes horribly wrong. You know Harvey's going to try to pick you, right? Marcus asked. I have arranged help. Texture of Barkdust cut off whatever complaint James was going to make. What now? Now? James clapped once. Now we put the chairs back, let people get back to what they were doing, and I go back to pretending I'm not in charge of anything. He grinned at the Order, and saw a lot of them grinning back, human and Camerconda smiles shining from the audience. Thanks for coming. Go back to solving problems. He made a shooing motion at them. Now noise and chaos overtook the room, as 100 people started working out how to leave, starting conversations and moving furniture as they did so. Most of the people on stage vanished pretty quickly to get their tasks rolling, but Reed stayed behind to talk to James. Hey, he said, quietly, once the mics were off. Hey, you alright? I'm not, I don't think, Reed said. I don't get it. How you can just let it go. Have you even talked to the potions about this? James shook his head, sighing as he unfolded the chair he was going to put away and sat back down. Not yet, he said. I will, though, but it won't change the decision. They murdered people, and you know they've done it before, Reed stated. I do. But we've got 2 options, and neither of them are great. Either we just demolish them, and do that every time we run into people we judge to be threats or monsters, or we try for something non-violent first. James leaned back over his chair, his head throbbing with a dull ache from earlier. We can't bring back the people who are dead. The only thing we can do is make sure that we minimize the amount of harm going forward. We could remove their ability to take action, Reed said. I learned that from you. You said that before. And yeah, it'd be a fight, but we did it with status quo. And because we didn't cross the line and kill all of them, it came back to bite us in the ass, James said with a snarl. Do you want to do that? Kill everyone, even if they surrender or go down? Because you'll have to. I won't. Reed stared at him, face contorting in internal conflict as he tried to figure out if he was angry or just depressed by all this. Eventually he sighed and turned away. We got a portable room done with the orange totems, he settled on. We'd like a few more, but you can safely use one to copy bulk mundane material now. Also, I have a design for a space elevator that should work and we can put together in like a month. Let me know when you have some of this sap for me to start testing with. How do you... James, Reed said quietly. I've met people like this. I've met a lot of people like this. I grew up around people like this. He turned, and James could see beads of tears in the corners of his eyes, just past the rims of his glasses. You're going to ask them to change, and all they're going to see is someone weaker than them begging for them to give up what they've got. They won't change, they'll laugh at you. Even if you take everything they have, they won't get it. They have spent so fucking long like this, they don't... You could lock them in this building and force them to live like us, and it still might take years for them to actually fix their shitty attitudes if they ever do. Maybe that's what we'll do then, James said quietly, pulling himself forward to meet Reed's eyes. I'll put it on the list, but it's going before gunfire and after words. The researcher stared back, eventually breaking the stare down as someone came through, folding leftover chairs and stacking them by the wall, interrupting the moment, causing him to turn away and deflate slightly. Good enough, he said. I just don't want this to be the moment where we decide to compromise. He didn't bother jumping off the stage, just tore a telepad that he had on him and vanished, leaving James as the last one up there with a dozen or so people still in the room. Yo, that was fun! Alana stormed the stage like it was Normandy as soon as James's conversation was over, wrapping him in an affectionate hug. I'm loving the whole let's do a weird democracy thing you settled on. To be fair, you helped with the concept. James ruffled her hair back, accepting a kiss from Anesh as his boyfriend also joined them. Hey, I need you to check some space math for me before research causes an international incident. I'm on it, Anesh said with easy acceptance. Then he paused, seeing James's subdued demeanor. Are you all right? I don't know, James said. He tried to put on a more earnest smile. Are we doing the right thing? No clue, Alana said instantly. Like Barkdust said, it's hard to tell what's right. She squeezed him a bit tighter, pinning his arms to his sides. But we're all making the effort to not be wrong. I don't know if that's enough, James admitted. Well, we can always change, Anesh said peacefully. And, speaking of change, there's 3 .mem files being shared on the server already of this very meeting. Want to get coffee and vibe to how other people see you on stage? Oh, God, no, James recoiled. But also, yes, I am strangely compelled by that. Let's go, before anyone else tries to get me to be responsible again today. I am exhausted. Exhausted, yes, but still moving forward. Still trying. Both to be right and to not be wrong. That was just what they did.